Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today we're looking at the tragic life of JFK's sister. On January the 20th, 1961, the newly elected President John F. Kennedy, at his inauguration in front of the Capitol, told Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Over 800 miles away in Jefferson, Wisconsin, in an institution called St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children, lived a 43-year-old woman who perhaps was listening to the address on the radio. Her name was Rosemary Kennedy, and she was President Kennedy's little sister. Rosemary Kennedy, was born on September 13, 1918, and was the third child and first daughter for Joe and Rose Kennedy. No source could quite pinpoint why Rosemary had issues, but they were apparent very early on. As we know today, there can be several factors and reasons for developmental disorders, from genetic to environmental factors. Rosemary's mother claimed several times that the nurses, due to the tardiness of the doctor, tried to halt her labor, injuring the baby in the process. Whatever the case here, even early in life, accounts describe Rosemary to be slower to crawl, slower to walk and speak than her two bright brothers. She also had a hard time eating with a spoon and steering her sled. By the first grade, she was already having difficulty keeping up in school. Despite all of this, many signs point to her having an otherwise happy, fulfilling life as a child and teen, participating and remaining active as a part of the wealthy and well-known family. She was described as beautiful, sweet, great company, and loquacious. And as put in Lawrence Lima's well-known book, The Kennedy Women, The Saga of an American Family, Rosemary was a picturesque young woman, a snow princess with flushed cheeks, gleaming smile, plump figure, and a sweetly ingratiating manner to almost everyone she met. Her parents reported to several media outlets, who were always requesting interviews and information about the Kennedy kids, that she was training to be a kindergarten teacher and that she had an interest in social welfare work. She is said to harbor a secret longing to go on the stage. In fact, Rosemary kept a diary during this time that was only uncovered in 1995. The diary is thought to cover 1936 through 1938, when Rosemary was 18 to 20 years old. She describes trips, riding horses, dances, spending time with her family, teas, and even a meeting with King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. In 1938, the whole Kennedy clan took a trip to England and was presented in front of the royal couple. As Joe Kennedy said at the time, recounted in his diary, "Rose, this is a hell of a long way from East Boston." Rosemary, along with her sisters, performed the rather complicated royal curtsy. By all indications, she had a fantastic time, though Lima reports that Rosemary nearly tripped and fell when she was presented. The diary itself, which was written in simple, short prose, but not unlike what you would read in a teen girl's diary today, said, "Went to luncheon in the ballroom in the White House. James Roosevelt took us in to see his father, President Roosevelt. He said, 'It's about time you came. How can I put my arm around all of you? Which is the oldest? You were all so big.'" The diary entries have led some historians and Kennedy biographers to believe that Rosemary may not have had a severe developmental disorder, or at least not as severe as it is often claimed. There are theories that she even simply just had dyslexia, based on certain signs of it in her writing, or perhaps depression. As will be described in a moment, she had severe mood swings when she got older. More nefariously, though, several books claim that Joe Kennedy didn't like that she was unladylike, sexually active, and at times unhappy. Whatever the case, in 1941, it seemed Rosemary's normal, good-natured demeanor changed. In her mother, Rose Kennedy's memoirs, she describes noticeable regression in the mental skills that she, Rosemary, worked so hard to obtain, and her customary good nature gave way increasingly to tension and irritability. She was known to run away, and Rose even described her as being violent. She was so strong, her blows were quite hard. That same year, Joe consulted with doctors to try to find a way to help his daughter, though some more nefariously speculate that he was simply worried about Rosemary embarrassing the family, and he came across a promising new procedure developed by Portuguese physician Antonio Moniz called a leucotomy, or today simply known as a lobotomy. It was seen as a last resort for those suffering from extreme psychiatric disorders, giving the patient a hope for contentment. The theory was that by severing the nerve connections to and from the prefrontal lobe, it would fix certain mental illnesses, depressions, and a host of other developmental disorders. Of course, by doing this, it potentially sacrificed the patient's personality and some level of their intellect, but at the time, the potential benefits were often seen to outweigh the potential drawbacks due to the lack of other viable treatments for possibly severe mental disorders. In the 1940s, performing lobotomies wasn't on the fringes of science either. In fact, Moniz won a Nobel Prize in 1949 for his discovery of the therapeutic value of leucotomy in certain psychoses. In November of 1941, Joe Kennedy had a lobotomy performed on Rosemary at George Washington Hospital by Dr. James Watts and Dr. Walter Freeman, who was a U.S. advocate for the procedure and called it soul surgery. Joe made this choice apparently without approval from Rose. She would later say that she was never consulted. As for the procedure, one of the surgeons stated, "We went through the top of the head. She had a mild tranquilizer. I made a surgical incision in the brain through the skull. It was on both sides. We just made a small incision, no more than an inch. We put an instrument inside." They then began making blunt cuts of her brain with a butter knife-like object. They finally stopped destroying her brain when she became incoherent and could no longer respond to questions they asked her. While the surgery did make her docile, it also resulted in her being unable to speak, walk, or communicate at all. It also rendered her incontinent and significantly diminished her previous mental capacity. She was, much later in life, able to recover some motor skills, such as the ability to walk with the help of a walker. Needless to say, Joe Kennedy, he was crushed. The procedure that was supposed to help his daughter ultimately left her, for all intents and purposes, completely incapacitated. After spending 7 years at a hospital in New York, she was sent to St. Coletta in Wisconsin, where, to quote, "She would be better off for her own sake and ours if she went to a home where she could be with people of her own mental capacity." When Rosemary went to Wisconsin in 1949, it was said that Joe Kennedy never visited nor saw his oldest daughter ever again. He passed away in 1969. Rose paid her a visit once a year, as did some of the children. Initially, Joe and Rose told reporters that Rosemary was to, quote, "teaching retarded children in Wisconsin and wanted to live a secluded life." Rose would later tell renowned biographer Doris Kearns Goodwin that she never forgave Joe for allowing the surgery to be performed on Rosemary, saying, "It's the only thing I ever felt bitter towards him about." As for John F. Kennedy's own relationship to his sister, during the campaign it was claimed that she was too busy to make public appearances. It was only after JFK's election in 1961 that they acknowledged that Rosemary was mentally disabled. On July 31st, 1963, the president signed the Mental Health Work Bill, attempting to free patients from lives stuck in institutions. While never explicitly stated, this may have been inspired by his sister Rosemary. This was actually the last bill ever signed by JFK. In 1962, Eunice wrote a heartfelt and at the time incredibly open article about her sister and published it in several magazines. She never mentions the failed lobotomy, but says that her family, mostly referring to her mother, did the best they could with Rosemary. She called her sweet, beautiful, and talks about the sadness they had in the family for her, acknowledging that she was, to quote, "mentally retarded, and keeping a retarded child at home is difficult." Eunice Shriver Kennedy would continue to talk about Rosemary for the rest of her life and would create the Special Olympics in dedication to her sister. Rosemary Kennedy lived until she was 86 years old and passed away on January 7th, 2005 in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that like button below and do not forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also, I'd like to take this moment to thank our patrons on Patreon. If you're interested in supporting us, please do visit patreon.com/TodayIFoundOut. And as always, thank you for watching.